globe logo, which says interpretation, and you can choose there your language which you want to hear, so English or Spanish. If you turn it off, you will always hear the language the speaker is using. Just some information about the rules of conduct in this session. It's really easy. Be nice to each other, be respectful. We don't tolerate hate speech in the chat or in any other way. This session will be live streamed on YouTube, so you have the possibility to switch off your camera or to change your on-screen name if you don't want to be recognized on YouTube as well. Yes, and this should be a participatory session, so we will have a 1-hour presentation, and then we have 30 minutes of discussion with you as the participants. And therefore, you can use the chat to ask your questions or to use the raise your hand function in the participants box on Zoom. Also, our YouTube stream is monitored and by our team. So if you are asking their questions, we will bring that into the session here live and bring that to the speakers. So then there's nothing more for me to say. I would just want to introduce our moderator for this evening. This is our friend here from Democracy National, Carlos Gonzalez Martinez, who is an activist, an independent consultant in Mexico, and he is also election advisor. And I'm really happy that he will be the moderator for the session. So please go ahead, Carlos, and thank you for moderating this great topic.
Muchísimas gracias a ti, querido Andreas, por esta introducción. Saludo con mucho afecto a todas y todos. Hablo despacio para facilitar el espléndido trabajo de traducción que están realizando para nosotros esta tarde en la Ciudad de México, noche en Europa. Vamos a tener una sesión programada para 1 hora y media con una exposición que ustedes seguramente compartirán conmigo, causa gran expectativa por la pertinencia.
Or you will agree that this is a very important session because it's extremely important internationally, but also in the case of Mexico. I would like to thank Andreas, Caroline, and all of our colleagues from International Democracy for this invitation, and obviously also to Bernardo Valle, as well as all of the colleagues that have been doing a terrific job for the coordination, all the logistics and everything, and of course Bruno and Joe, who are the co-chairs of the Global Forum on Direct Modern Democracy. I would like to thank Maite, who's the colleague who is helping us with the interpretation. I would like to appreciate her for her talent and professionalism. So Andreas has already given the indications and instructions that will be regulating us in this session. Together with the suggestion that he was making, I would also like to suggest that you should feel comfortable and that whoever feels comfortable switching their name, just write down your first name and just give us a reference so that we can identify you, whether it's the country you're joining us from or the organization you work for, in such a way that in case that we see each other, we also know who are we having a conversation with right now. In the second place, I would like to celebrate that this session is being held on the 25th of this month because, as you all know, today is the day that around the world we commemorate the fight of violence against women. So it's an orange day, and that's why I have an orange ribbon on my jacket so that I can join to this fight against violence against women. So I think that in a forum like this, the easiest thing to do would be just to express this publicly. And the most difficult thing to do is this is the time to acknowledge our deficit and to really face our problems so that we can join without blushing on this orange day. So today in this afternoon or tonight in Europe, we have one of the topics that has been debated the most in Mexico. We have had several topics of modern direct democracy topics going on, and all of them have probably been locally held. The most well-known was a plebiscite in Mexico City trying to decide if some public construction work should be done. This was back in 2002, meaning almost 20 years ago. And then in 2015, the federal district, back then Mexico City, had citizen consultation that had a great participation. And from there on, there have been several experiences of plebiscites in the state of Querétaro, in the state of Jalisco. And the latest one was in the state of Chihuahua, whose exemplary experience will be shared with us in a panel on Wednesday. So all of this has been for local experience. As we are having a conversation right now, there's another consultation done in Tlaquepaque and another one in Chihuahua in order to see if if there's a power recall. So we're just in time, but for the first time in history, not only the recent one, but in the Mexican political history, the government started, along with its administration, several modern direct democracy exercises. What does it consist of and what is the perspective? That's exactly what the person responsible for it in the Mexican government will share with us. Mr. Rabindranath Salazar, who is the undersecretary and is joining us right now. So I would like to tell you a little bit about his career. So Rabindranath was born in Tejalpa, in Jutepec, Morelos. That was the hometown of Emiliano Zapata. He graduated as a CPA from the Autonomous University of Morelos, and he also got a diploma in administrative skills for public security by the Technological Institute of Superior Studies of Monterrey in Cuernavaca. He has a broad experience in public service in Mexico. He was a senator in his hometown from 2012 to 2017, where he was a president of the Commission of Foreign Affairs in Europe, as well as the secretary of the Power Commission. He was also a member of the Communication and Transportation Commissions, the Social Development Commission, and the Youth and Sports Commission, and he was recently the general director of the Welfare Bank in Mexico. He's currently the Undersecretary of Democratic Development, Social Participation, and Religious Affairs from the Ministry of the Interior. And I would also like to thank his team for giving us the possibility of having Mr. Undersecretary here joining us. And let me make reference to our colleagues from Social Participation, specifically to Fernando, Benito, and also to Isabel Gonzalez, who has made all of this liaison possible. Mr. Undersecretary, it's an honor to hear you. We would like to ask you to please not speak too fast so that the interpreter can keep up. So you have the floor. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Carlos. It's a real pleasure being able to share this space with all of you. I think that it's a great opportunity for us to be able to exchange certain aspects about participatory democracy. And I would also like to tell you that we have gladly been able to see how in some European countries, you've also had some important and successful examples, specifically the case of Switzerland and the fact of preserving their currency without going in with the euro. So it was also a matter of a consultation and asking citizens what they thought was the best thing to do. And the latest case was Brexit, where British citizens decided to exit the European Union. So this has implied big changes as a nation in Europe. I would also like to thank specifically Mr. Carlos Andreas Mueller from International Democracy, and also Caroline from International Democracy, and also Bernardo Valle, and also to Ernesto Insulza from CONACYT, who has been joining us in this important process for us and for the country. And of course, I would like to thank Isabel and Benito and Agustin, who are part of this undersecretariat, where they're checking very important issues for the country. We have big projects coming together. We're talking about the airport, oil pipes, the corridor, and big projects that are happening in our country. I must say that long time ago, I had the possibility of being a major in my municipality, and we actually had an experience derived from a participatory exercise in Brazil that we applied in my location. We had the possibility for the people to decide which were the most important productive projects in their areas, and we called them pr- participatory productive projects, which allowed people to determine what was the priority need. And of course, that helped in my municipality so that we can have a more harmonious economic development addressing the needs of my location. So without further ado, let me tell you about this important presentation where I must say, I must tell you about all the actions that are being carried out in this subjective projects from the government. And let me just lay the foundation for my participation and all the actions that we are conducting in our country. For this, I will have my presentation. I will show to you so that you can also keep up and write down some notes. And at the end of this presentation, we'll be able to exchange these ideas and also successful experiences elsewhere in the world. And why not probably even some failures that may have come up so that can help us shape the model that we want to launch in our country. So with that idea, we will show you this presentation so we can also have it throughout this session. So it's really common to hear in some news shows that democracy is in a crisis and that there's a dissatisfaction of the population with democracy. There are even some opinion surveys whose results are used by some specialists to reaffirm that people have changed their political preferences. In Mexico, a plain sight, there's some data showing that this dissatisfaction with democracy is conclusive. Nevertheless, if we observe the information closely, we can come up with other interesting conclusions. And the existing surveys cannot really tell us if people are dissatisfied with the principles and values of democracy or if they want more or less democracy. What we can conclude from them is that people are tired of regiments and institutional arrangements that only privilege some and that create extreme inequality. It's true that people are dissatisfied with the results from some governments elected in the polls, but it's a mistake to interpret that as a demand to reduce democracy. That is to say, to have less plurality, equality, and solidarity and plurality. So the citizenship is not less democracy, but democracy right now, meaning that people want governments that create welfare for everybody, for the majorities, and for their opinions to be taken into account in the fundamental decisions of governments. In the case of Mexico, this desire for a better democracy was actually shown in the past presidential elections against some of the opinion surveys that were talking about a dissatisfaction with democracy. In June 30th of 2018, there was a broad voting that favored a left-wing candidate. The president-elect interpreted the decision or the result of more and a better democracy. In this way, it was established in the National Plan of Development 2019-2024, the document that dictates the strategies and the governmental work plans for the entire federal administration. And one of the guiding principles should be to get a superior way of government and a participatory democracy, which will be possible through generating social infrastructure as well as having public officials, people, and communities that make possible the socialization of the political power and the inclusion of people and communities in the decision making of the government. In this way, today I'm here to tell you about the efforts the Mexican government is making in order to get the democratic aspiration for building a government for the people, with the people. But before, I would like to tell you why we prefer to talk about participatory democracy than direct democracy. Given the fact that democracy implies the government of the people, participation has always been in the foundation of the idea of democracy, up to the point that it may sound redundant to talk about a participatory democracy. Nevertheless, at some point in history, the participation of the people was restricted due to the fear of decisions made by crowds or people who do not have information and are not able to reflect upon them. In this way, participatory democracy came up in order to favor the participation of the people and leaving the decision-making process to those who, quote unquote, do know, end quote. Participatory democracy restricted the participation of the people that it became an alienating and almost oligarchic regimen. Only some privileged ones could participate, privileged who were chosen by the people in the polls, but that did not really see for the welfare of people or the majorities. In this way, the people were just voting to choose the rulers for a certain period of time without being able to influence on how they should be ruled. In contrast with representative democracy, we had direct democracy, trying to get the assembly spaces or meeting spaces where communities gather up in order to deliberate and decide, just as it was done in ancient Athens or in Swiss districts. Currently, direct democracy is delimited in the practice to participatory instruments like the plebiscite or the referendum or the civic initiative. And in other places, this is a way to include the population in the decision making of important issues. But in Mexico, state and federal legislations include so many requirements to implement those instruments that it practically disables the use of them. And the argument is always the same, to protect the democracy of the people. In Mexico, we have a law for popular consultation since March 2014. But since then, only 4 attempts to start a popular consultation have happened. The 4 of them were supported by political parties in the Congress because the number of the signatures required is really high. And there are also some issues that are forbidden to be proposed, such as the attempt to have the constitutional reform in terms of power back in 2013. In this way, the 4 attempts in order to start a popular reform have been ruled out. Without a doubt, the usage of direct democracy instruments is a great advance in terms of representative democracy because it allows to get the opinion of people and even to decide on public policies. Nevertheless, the inception of direct democracy operating in some countries still restricts the participation of some people to vote in big national decisions, but with little impact in the everyday and short-term decisions, which are the ones that create well-being or a scarcity in the majorities. Without restricting the right to vote, it's important to point out that this cannot be the only participatory instrument. Asking people through popular consultation is important, but it's also important to include them in the deliberation, implementation, and follow-up process for the governmental programs. That means that it's important to have a participation that not only stays in the polls or only it's about big issues, but that it's also a way of living. Restricting democracy to voting for representatives or rulers makes democracy lose dynamism and vigor. And then we will have a crisis of democracy that should be restricted to a crisis of the representative democracy and the incapacity of the representation to rule for the people and with the people. Probably you may agree with me that talking about representative democracy is not redundant, is necessary, and we should always have that the participation of the people is the one that gives sense to people. Democrats should not be scared of the people, of the ones who do not know, quote unquote, because the democracy is the government of the people and for the people. And that's why in the Mexican government, we see participatory democracy as a superior way of government, socializing the political power in order to include people in the decision making that affects them. It's also what is known as democratic governance, which proposes a less vertical and more horizontal way of ruling. It's true that in the horizontal ruling or governance, they include some international entities, entrepreneurial entities, and political parties. In our proposal, the participation should also include non-organized people and social groups or communities with a lower capacity of organization. And in order to illustrate this proposition, just take the Constitution of the Mexican United States, where it clearly states that Mexican citizens, people over 18 years old, have a decent way of living. And this definition excludes big segments of the population, boys and girls, migrants, and a big group of the population that could be thought of not having a decent way of living. For instance, up to 60% of the jobs in Mexico are informal. But the exclusion of broad sectors in the population and of participation is intensified a little bit more if you take into account the marginalization due to geographic or economic issues, or because of a lack of real organization and lobbying capacities that are needed in order to influence in representative democracy. Therefore, it's important for us to distinguish between the citizen and social participation. While the first one talks about the participation of those who have the right to participate, the latter talks about the democratic need to include social groups that have no access to what is commonly known as the civil society. And therefore, the participatory democracy we're interested in implementing is the one that includes the participation of everyone, specifically focusing on those social groups that have been historically excluded. This has been established in two ruling or guiding principles: to not leave anyone behind or outside, and that democracy is the power of the people, and two objectives of the government in the same line: to have a participatory democracy. This inclusion process is also about developing full citizens for decision making, which tries to have a citizenship that is more inclusive and participatory. And as you can see, making this a reality actually poses a big challenge. And for this, we have been working on a new strategy to build a citizenship for participatory democracy with two elements. On the one hand, some actions in order to implement social infrastructure and social activities in order to make possible for everyone to exercise their human right to participate. On the other hand, some programs and actions in order to have institutional capacities in the public sector, as well as skills in people and communities. This process for building a citizenship implies a change in our reference frameworks on democracy. Every country has their specificities. But in Mexico, we have deeply rooted the idea that citizenship is a membership with obligations and duties, and this means that the passive rights of the Constitution, in exchange, you have to respect the law and the authority. In European countries, a lot of the rights executed by their citizens have been earned by social fights, meaning through the social participation and collective participation. When people participate in demanding and executing a right, executing their rights becomes a part of their everyday practices. But when the right is granted, it's hard for people to make them their own and to include them in their everyday lives. In this way, instead of promoting the change of scarcity conditions, the granted rights demotivate their participation. And in such a way, the human right to participate in decision making is not just one more right. The exercise of this right enables the citizens because it's an instrument in order to demand, have access, and to execute other rights. That's the case, for instance, of the economic, social, cultural, and environmental rights. For instance, access to water, to a decent housing, and to the identity of original inhabitants, amongst others. Therefore, in Mexico, we are boosting the idea that a citizen is not just one who has a membership that has written rights and that must respect the authority, even though they're reckless or unfair. The citizens we aspire for are people who are active, changing their social environment in order to have welfare actions, and also with the collective nature of their well being. In this case, the rights embodied in paper are really helpful because they are the guidance and the horizon in order to organize the participation and the collective actions in order to execute those same rights. Once we have defined the conceptual basis or foundations of my presentation, let me tell you about the specific actions that the Mexican government has started in order to do this democratic participation in order to build a government for the people and with the people. The current government has the urgency to start a deep transformation in a short period of time. The president, Mr. Andrés Manuel López Obrador, is setting the direction, and in the public service, we implement actions. In the meantime, we build the public politics based with the needs of the population. Those who think that there are some pre-made recipes for everything misinterpret public policies, and they think that everything and the entire model can be imported in order to use. But those of us who have clear that it's important to foster a change, we take this challenge with a lot of excitement and a lot of responsibility. In this way, in the last year, we have been building a participatory model of permanent dialogue, of which I will be telling you the main features. When coming into office, President López Obrador made 100 governmental commitments. One of them was that they will give preference to the indigenous populations of the country. They also posed two different projects in order to create a well-being in the country where we have the highest number of indigenous populations. It's not strange that these areas have the lowest rates of or the highest rates of margination. The projects I'm talking about is the interoceanic corridor of the Isthmus of Tehuantepec and the Mayan train, and they are aimed to providing a well-being to those communities. So the fear was that these projects would overwhelm or crush the populations. But in order to avoid this, we tried to include the vision and needs of the communities into a regional development plan. Also, in order to comply with the international guidelines, where we summoned a free and informed consultation whose objective is to boost regional development. In order to convey to you how relevant these actions are, just let me give you some context. During the 20th century, the Mexican government deployed technical and scientific resources for modernization that ended up in the systemic exploitation of natural resources in different areas of the country. For instance, there were some dams in order to strengthen the electric power, and also there was a road network and railroad network. But this infrastructure for the development of the country was built without consulting people or the communities that were affected by these projects. Tons of indigenous farmers were actually displaced from their territories, or their lands were flooded. They were promised to get compensations and benefits that have not been delivered to them yet. In the southeast and northeast areas of the country, there were some inequality gaps that were aggravated with some other conflicts, and there were some harmful effects in the environment with great repercussions in the productive vocations in the affected regions. For decades, there was a relationship between the government and the people with a vertical character, where they were not really asking for permission to people in order to implement any type of regional development. I would like to give you a few examples that I was actually experiencing closely. In the case of Morelos, the federal government back in 2012 approached us in order to implement a project for the production of mezcal and tequila. Clearly, this was not the purpose of the state. They actually produce rice. The rice from Morelos is the best one in the world. So the agave was not really growing there, and therefore they lost their investment in that area, and the project did not go through. There were several situations from the moment that it was not appropriate for the area. They did not ask the people if they wanted to have that as a productive project there, and it was just lost money. And not until 15 years after, we could have also the origin denomination, just as they have it in the case of Oaxaca. We have another example where encyclopedia in past governments, there was a big investment on computers for indigenous communities, where the situation was that these communities did not even have electrical power. So it was not really possible for them to use these computers or these TVs. So these are just examples where they're not taking people or the community into account. They make big investments that clearly affect the federal budget without having any positive results for the people. So in this framework and in a never seen exercise, in 2019, the administration of the president fostered three important experiences in terms of consultation with indigenous communities, a consultation for the constitutional reform on the rights of indigenous populations and Afro-Mexican citizens, and also for the interoceanic corridor of the Isthmus of Tehuantepec and the Mayan train. Just not to take too much time, let me just give you some data of the latest exercise that was done for the Mayan train. Besides of informative, deliberative, and consultative stages of the consultation, there was another follow-up and planning stage created. For this fourth stage, after hearing the deliberation and demands of the General Assembly, they voted on a tracking and monitoring committee. This means that the objective of the consultation was not to get approval of the project from the communities, but to establish a permanent dialogue project between the communities and the federal government entities or agencies. The objective of this project is to have the opinion of the communities in the deliberation and creation of the project. This exercise recognizes that in order to design public policies, it's not enough to just hear the communities, but it's also important to include the local wisdom in order for the projects to adapt to the region and to the communities themselves. In the specific case of the Mayan train, the logistic operation consisted of the creation of an intersecretarial or ministerial committee. where we have the National Institute of Indigenous People as a technical entity, the Technical National Fund for Tourism Development, and the Ministry of the Interior as the warrantor body. In the consultation, we had 4,190 indigenous communities distributed in 190 municipalities. In every microregion, there was a general assembly where indigenous representatives participated, where they had some signed documents expressing the opinion and the demands of the communities. On this same date, the 15 General Assemblies elected a tracking and verification committee of the agreements. It is worth mentioning that half of those committees had a gender equality, that is to say, 50% of the members were males and the other 50 females. It is also worth mentioning that in the 15 General Assemblies, we had top representatives from 17 entities from the federal government in order to listen live the needs and concerns of the people and the communities. Later on, the demands and opinions collected from this stage were systematized and were assigned to some specific federal entities in order for them to prepare an attention plan. The communities, along with the entities, will create a plan in order to foster this. And this joint planning is not just about the communities defining their demands and the care plans, but also for planning their activities and the budgets for this year and the next year. So this is a planning from the bottom in the region and especially with the people. There are still several challenges that we need to define in order to complete this stage. And these challenges are the budget and also the interministerial coordination. So we are open to all the help that we can get. So if anybody is interested in this issue and they want to help, I can give you more details because all types of help is always welcomed. Some days ago, I also had the opportunity of hearing some speakers in an international event where we actually got some very interesting ideas that can be included in the project that we are fostering right now. Some of the challenges that we have in front of us is that we need to have a change with the members of the civil society. Previous governments had the purpose of reducing the presence of the state in the region. They would finance some social entities that were the responsibility of some of the government. They were using the communities to use the budget of the state. But the president thought that tertiation outsourcing. And they were trying to get the purpose of people getting direct support. But it's true that some organizations of the civil society saw as a business opportunity to be the middleman or middle person with the government. We also acknowledge that most of the organizations that have been historically working in order to give a voice to the most vulnerable groups and to help them to meet their needs, these organizations are relevant stakeholders that should also be included in a regional development group or model. It is very important. I would like to mention that we have gone to this civil society discussions where they have different issues, environmental and human rights defense and healthcare issues and childhood issues. So we're in a synergy working with them in order to channel all of this projects so that they can be capitalized on in the best possible way. And we're working hand in hand with them. And I would really like to recognize all the organizations from the civil society. So besides this permanent dialogue projects, we have also boosted other types of exercises in order to include the participation of the people, given the fact that, as we have already mentioned, the current legislation in terms of the plebiscite referendum and the restrictive citizenship initiative, the federal government has implemented sui generis projects. The current legislation only allows a direct democracy project every 3 years, and the requirements are not easy to comply. These requirements are also present in the legislations of the federal entities, which have as a model the federal legislation. And that's why this administration so far has had 3 participatory exercises in order to ask people about some regional importance issues. This is, for instance, for the consultation of a thermoelectric plant, also for the Mayan train, and also about the installation of a brewing company or brewing factory in an area where they had a water shortage. So this is the idea of having a participatory democracy is not new. It started with President Fox, but in the last administration, they tried to implement also these exercises, and they had some exercises to have a diagnosis. From this, they mentioned that it was not inclusive or effective, and most of the spaces were actually consultative, and they had little incidence in the decision-making process. Nevertheless, Nevertheless, most of the times these mechanisms were used in order to simulate the participation of the citizens, but in the best case scenarios, they would include academicians and experts without taking into account the opinion of the people who do not know, quote unquote. For instance, out of the 329 mechanisms of participation in the federal public participation in 2017, it was observed that 15% of their members are representatives of the civil society, 12% of business entities, 7% are of collectives or social groups, and 6% of citizens, 40% of public officials, and only 0.6% are representatives from indigenous communities. So as you can all see, this participation spaces exclude the majorities, and therefore it is necessary to foster a deep transformation of these mechanisms so that they become an inclusive and effective participatory spaces. Given what the president wants, the federal entities have boosted several actions in order to have participatory committees in order to have direct transfers from the federation. So this is a case of the school committees of participation who have the parents as members, and they have $14 million distributed in several committees in order to make improvements in their schools. We have another example of the Social Development Institute, and this institute allocates money in order to make improvement actions. $228 million were allocated for some communities in the region of Oaxaca. Likewise, the Territorial Development Secretary is having a program for urban upgrading, and they are considering on the communities to participate in the design and follow-up of the improvements. It is worth mentioning that when they have visited areas such as the Mayan area, and these regions encompass the issue of housing, the community itself acknowledges which are the necessary materials in their community. So what they have approached them with traditional materials such as cement and blocks and so forth. The community has even suggested, you know what, we want palm tree, or we want adobe, or we want the materials of the region, which has allowed the policy to really adapt to the needs these communities have. For this program, we have considered $4 million annually for building this community participatory committees. In 2019, 80 committees were created, and it is expected that for this year, 2020, there will be other 60 committees created, distributed evenly in the cities. So these are clear examples of the will to grant decision-making or decision power to some communities that have been alienated. And with this, other entities have started important efforts in order to transform their mechanisms for social participation to make them more inclusive and effective. In order to coordinate these efforts from the governmental entities, in the Ministry of Interior, we are creating a social participation committee. It is important to mention that that system will be created in stages. In the first stage, it is considered to coordinate the federal spaces in an interministerial way. And we need the enactment of a law. And this is a legislative work that will be done at the same time in order not to stop the work. In order to make the system national, it's important to include the participation of state governments. The system we're planning has 4 essential work groups: the participation coordination, the implementation of effective participatory spaces, and also the creation of skills for a participatory population or community. So next, I will tell you what each of these work groups consist of. A work group of the policy for coordination. So here we have all the heads from all the different federal entities joining. They define the different commitments of the different federal and local entities. The participation cannot be effective if there's no coordination of all the agencies in order to define and to bring the government closer to the people. The social participation model that we want to foster is a model that I described before with a permanent dialogue, with a broad participation of all social groups, especially focusing on the groups that have been historically excluded. We would like to clarify in the social participation principles that if they only take the opinion of the citizens without an impact in the decision-making process, they wouldn't be considered as spaces for social participation. And it would not be considered a social participation space if it does not include in its majority citizens and from a social group that is vulnerable. Additionally, those social participation groups should establish some follow-up mechanisms in order to follow up the commitments, also to include the programming of actions in order to deliver on those actions. In this high-level group, we will try to achieve this consensus. We will have a technical secretary that will provide follow-up to the agreements and will provide specific propositions in order to maintain the agreements. For instance, the technical secretariat, along with some other people, will coordinate the mechanisms, and based on this evaluation, they will provide some improvement guidance for those who want to participate socially. Also, the technical secretary will make guides in order to create some social participation spaces. The work group for implementation and generation of spaces for effective participation spaces. In this work group, they will develop and implement the participatory methodologies and also for interinstitutional coordination with social stakeholders in the communities in order to have some effective participatory processes. That is the case of the intersecretarial group that provides a follow-up of the agreements for the interoceanic corridor of the Isthmus of Tehuantepec or the Mayan Train. But this is paradigmatic because the size has allowed to different social stakeholders to come together to foster the well-being of the communities. And if we continue down this path, we think that it will be relatively easy to persuade municipal and state governments to participate actively and in a committed way in this national system for social participation. But this work group also involves other spaces to participate in other governmental entities, such as for boys and girls in this work group is also strengthened by the presence and the work done by the organizations of the civil society and the communities, monitoring the participatory spaces. In order to monitor the progress in the compliance of the agreements reached between public officials and the communities, they will create a data intelligent platform which will provide a real-time follow-up to the different participatory processes that are happening in the Mexican territory. We will be able to have in real time the number of participants, the make of them, if they're public officials, representatives from organizations, citizens, indigenous representatives, or business entities. It would also allow us to know what are the different commitments the different agencies committed to with different programmings, what have they done in order to meet the demands, the level of progress, and also the budget for the next year. Besides providing a follow-up to the agreements, the platform will also allow to systematize the information in order to identify improvement areas in the different spaces of participation. With this information, for instance, we will be able to identify where is the institutional coordination missing or the capacities to comply with the agreements. And with this basis, we will be able to make recommendations to the entities, but also to other governmental entities to address the areas that have the biggest needs. On the other hand, on this group, we will also develop a digital platform that is interactive for participation in order to know what is the opinion of the people in real time about some local and national issues. It will be something permanent, but it will be also for decision making. And just as we are implementing this digital platform, so that it's also another area for the participatory spaces, and also the training creation for social participatory space. It is also essential to foster the skills to participate with public servers, the people in the communities. We are aware that participation not only creates a harmonious coexistence, but on the contrary, participation opens up some latent conflicts in the communities, and therefore skills are required in order to proactively solve conflicts that may come up from the participation processes. In order to participate, people not only need to have technical knowledge on the processes and not only about how to get organized, but they also need to develop their individual community. If people think of individual benefits, and if they do not know that the particular benefit depends on the collective benefit, it will be impossible to have a regional benefit as we have been proposing. This becomes even more relevant if we consider that in the last years in Mexico, some individualist practices have been taken as normal. This is a culture that has encouraged corruption. If we want to make a reality the principle of not leaving anybody behind or not leaving anybody out in the participation, it is necessary to have a strategy for citizen development. Only in that way we will be able to have a participatory citizenship that will take care of each other. Let me reiterate that this social participation system is still in the early stage. We still have a long way to go, but we have a good team that is committed and some allies in the academic area with a lot of experience in each of these areas. To conclude, I would like to just recap. As you may see, the challenge of boosting the participatory democracy in Mexico is huge, but it's necessary and urgent if we want to create inclusion and well-being for the groups that have been continuously isolated throughout the history of our country. At the same time, these actions are necessary in order to create social justice and create the conditions to have a peaceful coexistence. In order to achieve this in the area of social infrastructure, we're working in building this national system of social participation to make possible the exercise of this right and the participation. And in this way, we will transform in effective participatory spaces over 329 participatory mechanisms that currently exists in the federal public administration, which will allow to open and bring the government closer so that together we can make the decisions that every day have an impact on the lives of Mexicans. The most ambitious object in our social participation policy is for the participatory spaces to serve as a program and actions to participate. The public policies will be designed according to the needs of the communities instead of forcing for them to be designed from a desk in the capital city of the country, as it unfortunately has been happening most of the time. In this way, the participation system not only will change the way in which the government relates to the people, but it will also transform economic, political, and social relationships, as well as the environment of people and communities through the generation of more well-being and social integration. In this task, we are being joined by specialists in participation in Mexico specifically, and I would like to thank the contribution made by CONACYT. But also, we take really valuable experiences from Brazil, Colombia, and Spain. Nevertheless, the participation in this forum has made us turn to the Swiss experience, which even though it's marked in a very different social, political, and historical context to the Mexican one, there are things that are worth taking into account. Building a citizenship consists in creating the conditions so that every time more people can transform the scarcity and exclusion context through the demand and the exercise of more and more rights. And this should be possible through fostering and promoting effective social participation through an inclusive participation that has an impact in the public result. With regards to citizenship creation, we're looking for citizens that will understand or see themselves as a broader collective and that defend the human dignity. We are aware that all changes will not happen without any conflicts or reluctance from the factual powers, but seeing the conflict and the problem of instability is because of the authoritarian trends. We understand the conflict is important and that we are in charge of solving this conflicts, meaning cultivating and developing the skills in the citizens so that we can build a Mexico that is less uneven, more prosper and fair. I would like to thank everyone for your attention. Honestly, I am really pleased of participating in this important forum, and I'm here, or I'll be happy here to answer any questions or comments you may have. And of course, as I mentioned as part of my presentation, the possibility of having some contributions, as I've mentioned, because all types of help would always be welcome. Thank you so much, everyone, for your attention. Well, thank you very much, Undersecretary. We have 30 minutes.
Con mucho gusto, don Antasio. Vamos a pedirle a Andreas, que tiene el registro de quienes lo han solicitado, y vamos a ir dando las palabras. Veo una mano de Claudia Guzmán, presidenta de IDECO, y también en el chat nuestra amiga Laura de Suiza hizo una pregunta. Entonces, yo quisiera pedirles que desde luego con toda libertad
Carlos, excuse me.
Participen en.
Carlos, we have just.
I would like to thank.
Yeah. Maite, our interpreter is back. Thank you. We can now continue.
Yeah, but
no,
hold on, Andreas. Yeah. I think that you I'm not in the interpreting booth. No.
No, you're back again. That's great.
Oh, no, but really? Okay. Thank you. Okay, so now I would like to ask Andreas that we can have Andancio and Claudia Guzman so that they can tell us who we'll be hearing from. I would also like to take this opportunity in order to hear the question, Mr. Undersecretary, so that you can take it into account in Spanish, and later on we will hear the ones that Andreas makes. I would like to ask you to be very brief in terms of the questions. Do not take over 3 minutes so that we can really try to answer as many questions as possible. You can also write them down. Laura from Suiza is saying, where have you made this work published, or where have you published this works that the government has been doing regarding the Mayan train? I think that this will really help to trust public officials. So who would like to answer that? I don't know if Andreas, are you hearing me? Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Yeah.
Yes. Yes, you asked now the question, so the question.
Sí.
Yeah.
Sí, hiciste una pregunta, ¿no? Yes, you were asking a question. He was asking a question.
To Mr. Vice Secretary, right? So we have to unmute again.
Me voy a mutear nuevamente.
Okay. Muy bien, entonces.
Okay, so let's participate in the order that has been mentioned. I've already read Laura's question. Now let's hear Clara Guzman and then Atancio Gonzalez. 3 minutes. If anybody wants to take the floor, please let me know. Mayra Medina, you're a congresswoman. No, Mayra Medina from Mexico. Sorry, I apologize. So I will write it down. Claudia, Antancio, and Mayra. Please go ahead, Claudia. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for this opportunity. And once we have heard the presentation, I would like to ask a question, and hopefully it will not be so broad. So talking about development may be an aspiration if this does not take into account some plan that considers all the aspects encompassing social development, the economic development, the sustainable development, environmental development, and institutional and democratic development. From this Secretariat, what are the mechanisms that guarantee growth beyond infrastructural projects? And also, how does the plan for the national social participation system, how does it guarantee the autonomy of the institutions and the legislative entities that have the responsibility for coordinating the mechanisms for social participation and the political rights of everyone, including the ones that are already included in the current normativity? Well, Mr. Undersecretary would like you to please bear in mind these questions. I would like to mention on the list the people that I've seen raising their hands. We will hear also Atancio Gonzalez, and then Mayra Medina, Juan de Dios Barba, Diana Alvarez, and Reinan Dubenash. Atancio, please go ahead. Can you please enable your microphone? We cannot hear you, Atancio.
Se habla mucho de inversión.
Well, you've been talking a lot about investments, about the Mayan train, about the paradise in Tabasco and communities such as Oaxaca that have been building some rural roads, but you never really tell us what is the comparison if those roads are done with machinery or with labor. I would like to know, why don't you ever talk about the costs, and why don't you talk about the recovery of the investments in the case of the Mayan train and the refinery? How long or when do you think that you will recover the money? Because they're really good projects for the government, but we need to know for the citizens, how relevant can those projects be? Because you never talk about the cost, you never talk about the economic recovery. There's no comparison at all. Okay, thank you very much. Thank you, Atancio. That was your question, right? Yes. Okay, thank you, Atancio. So, Mr. Undersecretary, let's hear two more people, then we'll give you the floor, and then we'll give another round of questions so that you can answer them. So we have Mayra Medina and then Juan de Dios Barba. Okay. Okay, hello, good afternoon. Thank you everyone for opening up these spaces for debate. I think they're really important, especially with such an important person, just like the Undersecretary who's here with us, giving us this presentation. My question is, for instance, why not using the participatory institutes most of the country has? For instance, you were mentioning on your presentation the case of the thermoelectric plant in Morelos. And as far as I understand, in Morelos, they have INFEPAP, which is the Morelense Institute for Electoral Processes and Citizen Participation. So I would like to know, why in the case of thermoelectric plant, the IMEPAC did not come into play, since it has that purpose, because at the end of the day, I think it's important to take into account that the Ministry of the Interior cannot play a role for which we already have an institution that it's regulated, that has regulations and mechanisms, and especially for it to be able to deliver results for this type of consultations, which I think are really appropriate. But let's take into account that we cannot be the judges and participate in it at the same time. So that's one of my questions. And my second question is, in Mexico City, and if you do not know, let me give you some background. Last year, there was an enactment of the law of social participation in Mexico. And in this matter, the Electoral Institute in Mexico City is the entity in order to do the consultation for this participatory democracy and also for communitary participation. So in Mexico City, we have original neighborhoods and towns, and in this law, they are not recognizing them. So there is a law that was enacted where they will be protecting citizens' guarantees, where they are looking for citizenship participation, but they leave outside the original towns and communities and neighborhoods from the city. So I don't know if the undersecretary knows this, or for instance, the court approved not to have a consultation of the budget in Milta Alba, in Xochimilco, and in other communities that are original towns of Mexico City, and the consultation did not happen there. And there was no election happening at all either. So how is it possible for us to have a constitution in Mexico City where the neighborhoods and the people are recognized in the first place, but then we have a law for citizenship participation where they are not even mentioning the original neighborhoods and people of Mexico City? I would like to know, what do you think? Okay, thank you very much, Mayra. Thank you. I would like to make a suggestion to Claustro. Let's try to take into account that this is an international event and all the participations are really valuable. And Mayra, what you're mentioning is really important, but I would like to ask you to just put into perspective for our colleagues from other countries the problems in terms of the inclusion or not of original people in towns and communities. And it's really important the reference for some specific places, but probably is not as familiar for some other people that it is as it is for us in Mexico City. So later on, probably we may have another domestic or very national meeting with the undersecretary if he wants, in order to have this detailed conversation. So I would like to ask you to think on this perspective, so when we ask our questions, we can bear this in mind. So now let's hear Juan de Dios Barba. And afterwards, just like trying to stick to what I said, I would like to give the floor to Rainer Duvenage, who is a colleague who's not from Mexico, and I'm sure that he may have um, another question that is different. So thank you so much. Go ahead, Juan de Dios. I'm really happy to greet you. Thank you, Carlos. Thank you so much for the invitation. I'm really happy to be able to join you. I would like to greet Undersecretary Rabindranath Salazar. I think your presentation is a terrific presentation. It really acknowledges deficiencies and failures that have been in the past, that have happened in the past in the consultation and citizenship participation. And he acknowledges what is this administration trying to do? And the only thing that I would like to ask you, and I know that there are a lot of people in the federal government that believe in this, but I would really ask you to help us so that the president, Andres Manuel Lopez Obrador, could actually take some of these concepts into account. We were talking about the need of including respectfully all social sectors. He also talked about, or he has been mentioned, to include our social sectors for a permanent dialogue and for a citizenship participation. And what we have seen in the last almost 2 years of this office from the president of the country is him disqualifying all of those who do not agree with this point of view. And disagreeing is actually a constitutional right. That's the tool that really enriches the dialogue and debate, which we're doing here with an absolute respect of the ideas and everybody's way of thinking. And we think that given such a difficult health and economic situation we're going through, it's only through a respectful and objective and constructive dialogue that we can all really pull through. So I congratulate myself of having a serious public official who is taking the elements of this process for citizenship participation. And I would like to ask you to please pass on this message to the president, our permanent willingness in Coparmex, the Commission for our development, our willingness to having a dialogue and to creating projects, and together without being disqualified, we can push forward and continue advancing in Mexico. Thank you so much, Juan de Dios. As a moderator, I should also summon the comments. All of them are welcome. Please ask the questions that you think are appropriate for our speaker. And I would also like to take this opportunity, just because Juan de Dios already did. When you introduce yourselves, please let us know what organization do you work for, so we know where you are coming from. Oh, hold on, Carlos. Carlos, how about, so that we do not really do not answer any questions, how about we start answering these 5 questions, because of timing issues and because of this being really relevant and really interesting. Obviously, the ones that we cannot really answer right now, probably we can send an answer to them later on. We will be sharing our emails later on, I'm sure, so that we can really clarify all of these questions. because they're really relevant. How about we start with this 5, and then if we have time, we continue with more. And if there are some others that we cannot really answer, we will commit to really send an answer via email. Do we need to introduce ourselves and also tell you what country are we from? Well, just briefly, so that we can also hear Undersecretary Claudia Guzman, National President for the Competitiveness National Institute from Mexico. Okay, please go ahead, Mr. Undersecretary. Well, I would like to start by answering to Claudia. Thank you so much for your question. Well, you know what? The protocols of the consultations that we are carrying out, we provide a previous information. The idea is to have the groups previously informed, but there's something really important, which is the follow-up. So we inform people what the project is about, what may it bring, and once we express or once we have the agreement, there's a follow-up of the projects with the communities. In this way, we guarantee that the agreements from this consultation can actually be fulfilled appropriately. We also have the participation of observers, international and domestic. They may be personally, meaning that you can participate individually, or there may be also some organizations participating, and I repeat, domestic and international. And most of the times, the experience and the knowledge they have on the topics that are being dealt with clearly enrichen the process that we are doing in the case of this participatory exercises. Now, regarding the second question, can you also repeat your name, please? The well, or if not, oh, Atancio. Okay, Mr. Atancio. Okay. So we are working on a series of impact indicators along with the entities executing the programs. And we are including social indicators. So we have the task of seeing what are the results of the projects. And you actually mentioned a program that I personally love, and you were very accurate when you were mentioning it, rural roads. And you know what? By the time that we use labor from the communities, we are creating local jobs. What has been happening in terms of pavement in the case of Oaxaca, it's actually equivalent to the distance from Mexico City to Oaxaca, which is 500 kilometers that have been developed so far. And what I can tell you, because recently, before coming into this conference, I had a meeting led by the Indigenous People Institute. There was a meeting mentioning that there has been great savings because they are doing the most important things. They are including the people from the community. They are using materials from the region itself, and they are working along with the communities. And the idea is for the months to come to implement the same thing in other regions of the country. And this is starting in Guerrero, in the mountain area, where this type of roads are really necessary. And we've had the opportunity to be in Oaxaca and Chiapas and a lot of places. And it's really hard to get to those areas sometimes. So in this way, we will allow people and communities to be able to go from one place to the other. But we are also creating a good economy there. We are scheduling a visit. In the case of Quintana Roo, we will visit 7 original Mayan communities that have been requesting to be included in this road program. So there's no question that I think it's an iconic program where people are participating directly and they are also generating social economy in the community. So regarding the third question, we clearly aspire for this law that we are proposing to include participatory exercises in states and municipalities and for original towns and communities. for everyone to be included. We are having 329 exercises at the federal level, and we're trying to align it because it's really focused in each of the agencies. So we want to do this in an organized way with some impact indicators that will allow us to do a follow-up. And once we are able to align the effort done in this way, separately, we will be able to align them to a single policy that is very well organized for the federal entities. And obviously, we would like to invite states and municipalities to join at another level of government. Now, regarding the next question asked by Mayra, the social participation system is an interinstitutional social effort with the government, and we don't have the objective of imposing any regulations, but to open the government to the people. It's not a system of cohesion, but of a permanent dialogue. And what we want is people to to really make their own the decisions of the governmental policies. If we work in a coercive way, meaning that we generate a project without taking into account the participation of people, we will just go back to the past. So it's not something that is coerced. So we want to be a part of an exercise that it's much more recurrent on the social foundation. And lastly, the participation of Juan de Dios. Thank you so much for your concepts, Juan de Dios, and thank you so much for that willingness that you had posed. I should say that we have discussed this situation with the president, and he is completely willing to take into account all the sectors in the society, and that's why that we are making these consultations. In the past, when a project or an investment came in, it was not taken into account and it was just executed. And let me tell you that a couple of weeks ago, in Sonora, I was with Yaqui tribes, talking to them, respecting their norms and regulations, and they were tribes who had been displaced from their own lands and from their rights and their water, and some of them had to run away to Yucatan in the best case scenario. In the worst case scenario, they had to go to Arizona in the US. So we've been talking to them because there's a comprehensive Jackie justice plan, which includes the situation of recovering water, lands, and also having a harmonious development. And that's why sometimes there are these strong demonstrations against the government, but we should understand that they have suffered and they've been through a lot. So we need to be empathic so that we can work in a more organized way, especially with those communities that have not been taken into account. So it's a delicate situation, but people, once they get the right information and they know that we're on their side, clearly there's empathy going on. And clearly, Jackie tribes since 1935 had not been seen anymore. And on the contrary, in 1997, with President Cedillo, there was a project that went back to the progress with Cárdenas, meaning once again, they took away the land from them. So I welcome your comment, Juan de Dios, and of course that we are open to the participation of all the organizations like yours, have a positive system, as well as all the other colleagues who post this appropriate questions. Thank you so much, Mr. Ravindranath. We don't really have a lot of time. We have a long list of questions. They're sharing an email with us that I have already posted on the chat. lgrojas@segov.mx. And this is Luis Gabriel Rojas. He will be happy to establish a communication later on with the undersecretary. But I would like to also mention three of the colleagues who are here so that the undersecretary could make these comments. And I would like to say that we have Diana Alvarez we have Reynard Duvenash, and we have Tania Cepeda. So I would like to hear all of them. All the others, I apologize. We are running out of time, but I've already given you the email address so that we can stay in touch. And I'm sure that Rabindranath will summon us to another meeting so that we can continue with this dialogue later on. So please, Diana, please be very brief.
Muchas gracias. Muy buenas tardes a
Thank you
todos
very
y todas.
much. Good
Yo soy
afternoon,
presidenta
everyone.
honoraria de la Fundación de
I'm the
Niños Robados y
honorary
Desaparecidos
president
y
of
también pertenezco al
Missing
Observatorio
Children,
Ciudadano
and
por la
I
Equidad de
also
Género. Y bueno, ya mi
a
comentario
member
para no
of the
abundar más,
Citizen
lo
Observatory.
dejé en el chat
So
donde
my
se comparte
comment
con
is
todos
actually
y
in
donde
the chat,
simplemente digo para
shared with
abonar a
everyone,
la
and
excelente
I
ponencia
just
del
want to
subsecretario. Creo
say that it
necesario
was
que en
a
los
great
grupos donde sí se
presentation, but I
pueda,
think that it's
que
necessary
se
in the
puedan
groups where it's
implementar,
possible
obviamente se tendrán que regular
to
alguna
implement, and
normativa,
obviously there may
las
be some
consultas
regulations
utilizando
implemented.
los medios
The
tecnológicos y
consultations
digitales y
using
de esta manera
digital
pues
and
también digo a la
technological means,
ciudadanía
and in
el
that
poder
way
estar de manera
the
permanente pues
citizens may
opinando
be able
sobre
to be
la
permanently
reacción o la relación de
giving
las
their
políticas
opinion
públicas. ¿Por qué?
regarding
Bueno,
public
esto va en el
policies.
sentido de que
Why?
diariamente
Well, because
prácticamente las necesidades sociales van cambiando.
daily
Algunas, pues
social needs
obviamente con base
change.
en las acciones que se
Some
van
of them,
implementando
obviously
por
based on
los
the actions
gobiernos, pues
implemented
van
by the governments,
solucionándose y
which
otras pues van requiriendo mayor
solve
necesidad.
or are
Entonces
solving
simplemente
some
es para
things, and
abonar
others
en
are
ese
just
sentido. Muchas
creating more
gracias.
needs. So that would be my only comment. Thank you so much. Reynard, if you're still there, if you're still around, I have seen him before.
Yeah, I'm here.
Oh,
I'm here.
there you are.
Yeah. No. I have mine is more of a comment than a question, and I'll also be brief because we've almost reached the end of our session. But no, I think I just wanted to say I think it's a very good idea to get into to have a dialogue with communities that have been disadvantaged, and I think it's something that in South Africa we are lacking, since we also have a lot of inequality in society and a lot of people that have been left behind, so to say. And I just and I think that's the way to do it. You know, coordinating with people, communicating with people, and having these initiatives, and also combining the initiatives with civil society with civil society organizations. And I just want to say that's something that we could perhaps in South Africa also learn from. So that's my statement. Yeah.
Gracias a ti, querido Reinar. Supongo entonces que nos saludas desde Sudáfrica y ahora.
Thank you so much, Reynard. I'm guessing that you're joining us from South Africa, so greetings. And we also have Luisa. Luisa, we would like to hear you also. Yes, I would really like to thank the Undersecretary for his amazing presentation. I've been out of Mexico for a long time. I'm in Switzerland. I'm used to consultations. I know that they're a first world thing. And in Switzerland, they ask to everyone, what do we do with the money? Should we invest it in gold or in dollars? And they ask everyone if cows should have horns or not. So I'm really used to not having any middlemen, and for the money of the government when it's needed, it gets there directly. The government is really sound and strong. We do not have an electoral institute which is being questioned in terms of their credibility. And here, nobody really knows what's the name of the president from an electoral institute. So in this Mexico, going through a crisis in terms of the credibility with the electoral institute and with these efforts, I have the certainty that Mexico is on the right path. And my request to the Undersecretary is for the consultations to really also reach Mexicans abroad, because I'm convinced that all of us who have left the country because of bad governments, we want to go back. Unfortunately, we've been experiencing the pandemic and we have children going to school and our lives are a little bit more settled here. But we really want to be able to go back once we retire. So it'll be very important that in those consultations, we're also considered in terms of participatory democracy. So that would be my request, Undersecretary. Please do not forget us, because I'm sure that the brain leak is something that we're all seeing. And I would also like to let you know that we have a collective present all over Europe. We're present in Norway, Germany, Switzerland, Spain, and we can definitely help you whenever you need. Thank you so much. Thank you. Mr. Undersecretary, you only have 2 minutes left. Thank you very much. So very briefly, thank you so much, Diana. We are including a technological system that will allow us to provide a real and agile and quick follow-up. And that's why I would really like to thank the collaboration that we have with CONACYT. They're helping us with their specialists to build this digital follow-up model in order to be more agile with the consultations and the results and the follow-up and also the transparency. Secondly, with regards to South Africa by Reiner, thank you so much for your comments. Of course, we're interested in learning from experiences from other countries. And I should tell you that before I had this responsibility, I had the responsibility of having the development of the welfare bank. We called that the Bank of Mexicans. And fortunately, we were able to take some experiences from India and other places where they've had the opportunity of generating institutions like this, where bank services are at a very low cost, they're very good services, and they privilege the possibility for people to having better conditions in terms of banking services. So thank you so much, Rainer, for your comment. And Tanya, greetings from Mexico. You're completely right with regards to the case of Switzerland. You're really advanced in the decision-making process by taking citizens into account. And there are other countries that I'm sure are jealous of you, but jealous of you in a good way. Norway, for instance, they're very lucky. Every child who's born there already has the resource. Why? Because they have diversified the resources that come from a good management of oil and gas. And even though Mexico is one of the main producers of oil and gas for decades, just tell me, what have we gotten? Nothing. Unfortunately, bad practices and bad decisions still make such valuable resources not to develop as they have in the case of Norway, or the decisions that they make a consultation in the case of Switzerland. And that's what we're aiming for. And currently, we do take into account voting abroad. Nevertheless, we do need to advance to other areas so that we can also take into account the decision of other Mexicans who are abroad. And unfortunately, they do not leave sometimes because they want to. They leave because they have a lack of opportunities in our country, and we want to change that. I had the chance of visiting several Mexicans abroad, and it was called Mexican Talent Abroad, and they were very, very talented. They were developing satellites in Britain, and other talented people in Spain and Germany, and they really love our country so much. So we are taking their experiences in order to leverage a lot of initiatives in Mexico. So Tanya, I really congratulate you for your comment, and thank you so much. And of course that we have your data so that you can send us information. And thank you so much for showing so much interest and keep supporting our country. So greetings to all Mexicans abroad. We know that you are making big efforts in order to support our dear nation. So thank you so much, Carlos. And I would like to ask everyone, whoever has a comment or a question, please send them to me. I wish I could answer everyone. I think it's really valuable, the fact that we can be here communicated and that I can be participating in such an important forum is something really valuable. And I wouldn't like to leave any question unanswered. So please send them to me. You have the information already so that you can send them and we can send you the answer. Or with the information that you can give to us, we can actually reinforce the efforts that we're making right now. Thank you. Well, thank you so much to our speaker, Ravindranath Salazar. Thank you so much, Mr. Undersecretary. And thank you so much to our hosts and organizers and to everyone. We There were over 70 people joining us in this Zoom meeting. When I looked here, we had over 60 people also on YouTube. So thank you so much. Just a final announcement. On Tuesday, September 29th, when we have our last program, we will have a panel at 6:30, taking into account the experiences of Mexico, Chile, Taiwan, and California. So we'll see you there. But in general, in all the activities of the forum. Andreas, would you like to say anything else in order to wrap up? We only have 6 minutes left. Or we have exceeded 6 minutes, actually.
Yeah, a little bit over time, but that is totally fine. Thank you so much for this great and interesting panel. Thank you, Mr. Undersecretary. Thank you, Carlos, for this great moderation. Yeah, we had a long day. We are closing now our 5th day of the forum. Today we had 4 sessions. But yeah, as you said, we will have some more sessions the next days. Tomorrow we have our main day, at least in European times. We will start at 11:30 Central European Summer Time with a panel on democracy and our future on democracy. Where will you go with our democratic instruments? And then we will have 9 parallel workshops, a big open space session from COVID-19 and democracy to voting rights in Europe, the Yellow Vest movement in France, and so on. So a lot of interesting things. In between, we will have some yoga breaks to get our minds and bodies again fit. And then we will have a little after-work session and party in the evening. But as you said, we will have also another session on Tuesday next week, your time, 6:30. Joe Matthews posted already the link in the chat, but you will also find this session on the website. Please register, join us again for the next days. We're looking forward, and yeah, thank you so much. Have a nice day. Have a nice evening. Bye-bye.
Gracias a todos. Muchas gracias, Andreas. Inviten a la fiesta.
Thank you everyone. Andreas, invite us to the party.
Yes, we will. Thank you. And I have to say thank you so much, Maite, our interpreter, for this great work. Thank you. Otherwise, the whole world doesn't speak Spanish, but with you, it was perfect. Thank you.
Muchas gracias, Maite. Muchas gracias. Thank you very much.
Gracias a todos. Get ready for my democracy yoga.
Muchas gracias.
Gracias. Bye bye.
Chao.